Thank you, Tom and band, for leading us in that so well. Just felt as Andy was sharing earlier and praying through circumstances with change, I just had a real sense there's someone, or maybe more than one, in the room who their, I don't know if it's healing would be the right word, might be healing, is something to do with disappointment with the church. And it might not be this church, it might be history of churches, but there's been something that's disappointed you in the past with the church, and you've been hurt in some way. And Jesus, I just felt this morning, wanted to let you know that don't be disappointed with the church. It's still my bride, it's not perfect, but look to me. Get plugged into a church. I just felt there's something here about hurt in that way. And so if that's you, I'd love to pray for you afterwards. But what we're going to be doing today is carrying on with our series on in the Sermon on the Mount. We started off this year looking at the Beatitudes and sort of one at a time, and we have now sort of gone into the bigger bit of the text after the Beatitudes, where we're taking some of the passages from the Sermon on the Mount week by week and looking to see what they say. Today's one is a particularly hard one, I guess, in a sense. It can be very emotive. Some of you might be able to relate in some very personal ways to this. My hope is that I will, as best I can, pastorally preach this passage to you today, and let's try and understand what Jesus is saying through this. We're going to be looking at Matthew 5 today, 27 to 37, and I'm going to do my best to unpack this and help us to understand what maybe Jesus is saying, and maybe even dispel some of the myths about what he isn't saying. And so there's kind of three sections within this. I'm going to take them one at a time and just try and work through them as best we can, as pastorally as we can together, and understand what it means for followers of Jesus. Because like we said when we looked at the Beatitudes were this is what it should be for those that follow Jesus. And the bit now of the Sermon on the Mount is this is how it should work out in the lives for those of us that follow Jesus. And so we're in what's often called at the moment these antithesis, which is where Jesus starts a number of these statements. You have heard that it was said. And then what he's trying to do at this point is similar to what I said a couple of weeks ago, where he was looking at the law and saying the law is not obsolete. He's right now showing us how to interpret the law. You have heard that it was said. The people in the time who picked up this message, they would have had the Old Testament. They would have had most of the Old Testament at that point for them to have probably heard, been read out. So they would have heard what it was said. But what Jesus is trying to help them do is go, well, look, this is how you interpret these things, and this is how it should work out for followers of Jesus. And so he's getting at really here is this heart obedience we're looking at, because he's challenging some of what the Pharisees, what the teachers of the law were saying. It was all this external, looking right on the outside, and Jesus is coming along saying, well, you've heard that it was said, and then he tells you something, but actually he then takes it even deeper, because we're looking at heart obedience when it comes to followers of Jesus, not just this external transformation where it looks right on the outside. And so that's what we're going to try and do today with some of these, what I think are quite tough passages to read and to understand. So I'm going to first of all read you Matthew 5, 27 to 30, and we're going to try and unpack a little bit of this together. It says this: You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Nice cheery Sunday morning bit of the Bible to talk about together, isn't it? But there's some real truth we can understand as being followers of Jesus in this room. Firstly, I want us to understand that in the context that this was written, adultery was considered one of the most serious offenses around at the time. Reason being because it not only broke a marriage relationship down, but it also reflected a breakdown of a relationship between God and his people. So it was really, really serious because of the reflection that the people of God understood it to mean. In fact, if you read in other parts in the Old Testament, adultery is often used to describe the way in which the people of Israel went after other gods rather than God himself. They were accused of adultery because of following other gods. And then what we find when Jesus comes along is he reaffirms this Old Testament commitment to the unity of this marriage bond. But he then takes it to its even deepest meaning, because you could be sat there going, well, it's all right, I'm not an adulterer. But then Jesus comes along and goes, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Wow. I'm pretty sure everyone at that point who was listening was going, oh, that's not easy. You see, the reality is what Jesus is saying is it's not enough to just maintain physical purity. The purity of marriage includes exclusive devotion to one another with every aspect of your lives. This commitment excludes wanting another person or giving oneself in any way to another person. What Jesus is saying is, and so what he's getting at here is that even looking lustfully at another woman or man, it can be vice versa, breaks the bond of oneness that a man has with his wife. As I say, these are almost somber words that Jesus is bringing, but he does it for a reason. And Jesus is illustrating here the seriousness of what lust can do. How it can destroy a marriage bond through two very, very graphic examples of gouging out your eye and having your right hand cut off. The reason he uses those examples is because more people tended to be right-handed, and it was often their stronger, more powerful side. And so it was seen as a way of representing actually that's what often is the hands which are often sinning. But also the eye is where the sin comes in the first place, gouging out. Now, I want to make sure this is clear here, that Jesus is not saying, if this is an area you struggle with, you'll literally need to follow these examples. Okay? We're not gouging out anyone's eyes or chopping off anyone's hands. Although if you go back to some of the early church fathers, that is how they interpreted it. And so I feel for those people back in those days who would have had hands chopped off. Jesus is using hyperbole here to exaggerate, to emphasize the seriousness of single-hearted devotion. That is what he is getting at here. You see, life in the kingdom of heaven does not produce otherworldly people, but it should produce followers of Jesus who live out human relationships, including marriage, the way that God had originally designed them to be. In a world we live today where marriage has been almost so demeaned, we lose some of this, don't we? We've lost some of this almost sanctity of marriage, this almost throwaway type culture we have nowadays. But that's not how God designed it originally. And so what you're starting to see here in this little bit of the text we've been looking at is Jesus is picking up on something of a couple of the commandments where he says you shall not commit adultery and you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. But he takes it that step further. He's trying to help us reclaim something of the sanctity of marriage. You know, it's one thing for a husband to say that he has never committed adultery, but it's another thing to say that he has never violated the marriage through flirting with another woman or even looking at pornography. That's tough, isn't it? Jesus takes it a step further. Not so that we walk around feeling condemned or if we've messed up in those ways, we can't find forgiveness. He doesn't say that. But what he's trying to help us do is reclaim something of the sanctity of marriage. It is a oneness. It is a joining. It is a union. See, the reality is the arrival of the kingdom of heaven and Jesus' ministry enables his followers to have that kind of marriage that God originally designed. It enables us to give ourselves solely and only to a married partner if we are married, and to treat them with the dignity that they deserve because they're created in the image of God. And anything less demeans them. You're going to go out buoyant today, I can tell you from this message. This is serious. God wants us to know how serious he takes a covenant. If you have entered into a married covenant, that's a serious thing. Take it seriously. Live it out seriously. But then he takes it a step further. If in Matthew 5 we read those verses 31 and 32, he says this, "It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery." I think some of these verses have probably been used in the history of the church almost in an abusive way to control marriages. And let me help you to understand what I mean by some of that. The reality is, even in Jesus' time, something of the sanctity of marriage was starting to be lost. So much so there were even two different schools of thought back in the time, because divorce was talked about. And they were trying to figure out what it is to be in a relationship which may be worthy of divorce. And even back in the day, there was a much more conservative school of thought that said, well, it's only for if adultery happens within a relationship. But the more liberal school of thought said, well, even if your wife cooks you a dish that you don't like, you can divorce her. None of you would do that if your wife put a dish on those of you that are married, on the table that you didn't like, you would divorce her, okay? I'd like to think. If that appeared on a divorce certificate, it would be hilarious, wouldn't it? But this is what the schools of thought had. And have you noticed that even in the world we live in today, I reckon we've demeaned marriage so much that people are getting divorced for really silly little reasons? They've almost lost something of the sanctity of what it is to be married. And so what Jesus is wanting us to do here for followers of him is to go back to the original intention, both for God's institution of marriage and for what was originally intended. See, God intended marriage to be a permanent union of a man and a woman. That's what he intended. You go right back to Genesis, it's there. You read in Malachi, we also read that God hates divorce because it tears apart what should be considered a permanent union. Therefore, Jesus states categorically that divorce creates adultery. However, Jesus allows for an exception. Even though God sees marriage as permanent, sometimes the marriage bond has been violated to such a degree that a spouse has already torn apart the marriage union. It happens. You may have experienced yourself. You may have had loved ones that have experienced this. You may have people you know who have been torn apart through divorce. It happens. And often what the Bible uses some terms, and sometimes the English translation doesn't fully replicate what was written particularly here in the Greek, and we might just read the word adultery without understanding what it really means. It uses a couple of different words here in the text. One of them is porneia, and one of them is morcheo. And morcheo is the one that actually means adultery in itself as we would understand it, but porneia means something a little bit less specific than sexual infidelity. And they're both used in the text. It means something a little bit less than sexual infidelity, but something more than maybe a little bit frivolous. See, the reality is porneia probably includes any sinful activity that intentionally divides the marital relationship. And when you put it in that context, there's lots of things that could fall into that category, aren't there? Jesus, though, states unequivocally the sacredness of the marital relationship, but seems to allow divorce to protect the non-offending partner and to protect the institution of marriage from becoming a vulgar sham. I truly believe that divorce is not God's ideal. However, if there is a non-offending partner who has been hurt in some way that needs protecting, that divorce is an option. I wouldn't say it's the first option, because I believe forgiveness and reconciliation should always be what we look to. However, I do not believe that Jesus is here saying, if you are in an abusive relationship, I want you to carry on for the sake of the sanctity of marriage. I believe what he is saying is there are exceptions, and they are exceptions, not just a bad meal cooked, where it is okay. I want you to know that if you are in an abusive relationship, or have been, there is grace from Jesus to help with this. The true followers of Jesus not only respect the purity of the marital relationship and have God's values for the original design, but they are unreservedly committed to its permanence and sanctity. But there may be occasions where actually there is only one option left. But that should not be our first choice. Told you it's really uplifting today, by the way, so I'm not done yet. See, respecting the purity of marriage also allows Jesus' followers to understand God's original design. We should be looking to see marriage as something so sacred that it should not be broken except when the most extreme conditions make it impossible to remain married. That's how we should view marriage. God designed a pattern for the ongoing health of the human race. As a man and a woman enter into a marital relationship, they commit themselves to each other as one indivisible unit. To be unfaithful to the relationship is to be unfaithful to God, who brought the two together. To stay firmly committed in action, words, thoughts, emotions, priorities is to experience God in that way and helps maintain life in this world. But like I said, sometimes that doesn't work. And reconciliation and forgiveness are always the goal of any disruptions in a community of faith such as this. But if all attempts at reconciliation fail, then divorce is possible, but it is not the first step, and it is not mandatory. Jesus also here, and I think these things are important, he did not state that remarriage in the case of legitimate divorce is invalid. I've heard it said before, if you've been divorced, you can't get remarried. I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe Jesus is saying that here. Further, he also did not state that illegitimate divorce and even illegitimate remarriage are unpardonable sins. Jesus doesn't say any of that. Some people might be living under those clouds of guilt. Whilst there are consequences, maybe, for going against Jesus' intentions for us, we've got to be careful not to create oppressive burdens that cancel out God's grace and restoration. So if you're married in this room, I want you to have the best possible marriage you can. But if in the moment that's not the case, I want you to know there's help. For instance, I've even touched on this morning adultery and used the word porneia, which comes from pornography, goes to pornography. Even in this church, we have someone who is trained as a counselor who helps people. Now, I had to get this right. I had to ask him what it was. I said, are you someone who specializes in sexual addiction? He said he doesn't like that term. So you'll have to go and ask him. But Chris is a trained counselor, works for a project called the Naked Truth Project, a Christian organization where if you are trapped in something to do with pornography, you can get help. Anonymous help. It's out there. I'm not saying you have to go and speak to Chris, who's a part of our church, because that might get really weird if it's someone you're meeting every Sunday, but there is help for you if that is you. And don't feel guilt over that. It's better to get help now than before it's too late. But I also say that's if you're married. If you're in this room and you're divorced, I want you today, I just felt as I was preparing this, I want you to know freedom from guilt this morning. You might feel guilty that a marriage broke down for whatever reason. You might feel guilty, you might blame yourself. I just felt God wanted you to know there's grace this morning for you in this place. There's grace for you. You don't need to live under this burden. We sung that song, didn't we? Circumstances will change. If your circumstances have been one of a heaviness because of a past relationship breaking down, I want you to know this morning that Jesus says there is grace for you. But then also, I've had this on my heart a lot over the past 6 months for the singles in the room. Because I feel in the local church we have failed singles. And when I say the local church, I'm going as broad as I possibly can. I feel we talk a lot about marriage. I feel we talk a lot about what it is to be married, what it isn't to be married. I feel we don't talk a lot about singleness. And I feel the church has failed singles. And for that I am sorry, where the church has. Because you might be sat here thinking, well, I'm single, or I'm divorced, and I don't want to be married again. This has got nothing to do with me. I think we need to reclaim singleness as the Bible describes it. Listen to this from 1 Corinthians 7 and 8. This is Paul here saying, I wish that all of you were as I am, but each of you has your own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that. Now to the unmarried and the widows I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried, as I do. How many of you that are single have heard the message, it is good for you to stay unmarried? Or how many of you who are single have heard the message say, you are not complete until you're married? Or if you've not heard that directly, you feel that. You feel incomplete in a church if you are not married. I'm sorry if that's how you felt. That is wrong. Paul here is clearly saying it is good for you to stay unmarried. You might think, how is that good? Well, because marriage is not the be-all and end-all of life. Relationship with Jesus is the be-all and end-all in life. And you can experience that in its fullness just as you can within marriage. So much so that Paul goes on to tell you this in 1 Corinthians 7. I would like you to be free from concern. An unmarried man or woman is concerned about the Lord's affairs, how he can please the Lord. Excuse me. But a married man is concerned about the affairs of this world, how he can please his wife, and his interests are divided. An unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and spirit. But a married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world, how she can please her husband. I'm saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way in undivided devotion to the Lord. The reality is, if you are single, you are possibly, don't misquote me here, more useful to God than a married person because you have sole focus. You focus on God. You are not necessarily distracted by a married partner. you can focus on God. If you look at any given church, I guarantee the church is almost supportive by a whole host of singles who do amazing stuff that goes unnoticed. I could point them out to you in this room, in this church. I'm not going to. I could. And they are incredible servants. Now, I'm not saying you can't be an incredible servant if you're married. I'm not saying that. But how often have we said to singles, those that are not married are essential to the local church and to the kingdom of God? You don't hear that message preached very often, do you? So what does that mean for us as a church? It means the reality is if we have singles, and we do have singles, I could tell you who they are in the room, we should be lifting these people up. Not in a way that's derogatory, but in a way that says, I appreciate you so much. And not only that, we should also be looking to bring them in. I look at the local church and go, why is it, and I'm guilty of this as well, so I'm not pointing the finger, that when it comes to even these hospitality cards, right, that you've all got, that you're all going to fill in today, right? If I'm in a married relationship, why are the people that I know in church and the people that I hang out with other married people? Not everyone, but it happens more of the time. Why does like always call to like? When was the last time, if you're married or in a family, you had a single over and brought them in as part of your family? That's how it should be. That's how the church should operate. In a way where if someone is single, they don't feel alone because they have such deep relationships with families, with other people in the church, that they feel fulfilled in that relational way. So I want you to know today, if you are single, you are so valued. I'm sorry when we've not valued you, if we've not valued you as a church. It's a very general statement, but I appreciate you and all that you do and who you are. And if God has called you to a life of singleness, I pray that this is a church that you will be able to find relational fulfillment through a family. And finally today, I just want to briefly touch on oaths. Verses 33 to 37, it says this, and this is only very brief at the end. Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Jesus here goes to the heart of the law when it comes to regarding oaths. He's not talking about swearing here in terms of profanity. He's talking about making promises, invoking God's name to guarantee the truth of what you've said. You know, I've had this a few times where people play what I call Bible top trumps. And I tend to, I'll smile and nod, but also won't go, okay. So for instance, I was looking back at all my old emails recently because I've been doing something about the timeline since I've been here, and I had someone write in an email, they disagreed with something I was saying, and one of their sentences in it was, well, God is my judge. It's Bible top trumps. It's basically saying, well, you can't challenge me because God is my judge. Honestly, that is, it's exactly what God is saying here, what Jesus is saying here shouldn't be the case. You shouldn't have to make these statements. In other words, a simple yes or a no, he is saying here, should be enough for a trustworthy person. If you're a follower of Jesus, a simple yes or no should be enough for you without having to invoke some kind of, well, God is my judge, or God told me this. As soon as you start doing that, you're playing Bible top trumps. And as soon as you mention the name of God, you can't beat that. You're saying, you can't tell me right or wrong. Who are you? God told me this. But the reality is Jesus is saying we shouldn't do that. True followers of Jesus do not need to give oaths in order to confirm their trustworthiness. Because your faithful life repeatedly should confirm the reliability of your words. This again is a test of the heart. The reality is what we speak with our lips come from our inner being. A dependable heart will utter dependable words. A person with an honest heart will speak honestly. If we add to our yes or our no anything such as, yes, I swear, or, or I swear I didn't mean that, or you can almost tell that something is not right. Jesus is saying, if you are trustworthy, if you are truthful, your yes or no should be enough. And the reality is, truthfulness is one of the most basic necessities in the daily activities of life. When each person's word is honest, we can trust each other freely. But when a person's word or handshake on a matter cannot be trusted, that really complicates life. And we live in a world nowadays where lying is so commonplace that we often don't know whom to trust. But this community, here as followers of Jesus, we should be looking to build a community where trustworthiness and trustfulness are so apparent that if someone says yes or no, we can believe them because they are dependable. That is what we should be looking for. Followers of Jesus should be some of the most trusted people when it comes to their words. I'm going to ask the band to come back up now. And what I want to do is I just want to pray. Because, like I said, it's not... The Bible doesn't hide away from things. As a church, we've made it clear we want to preach the Bible. We want to talk about the Bible. We don't want to cover up the difficult stuff. So it doesn't mean you're going to come every week and it's going to be all la, 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 that's lovely. It means sometimes there are real tough truths that we've got to work through. We've got to wrestle with, because we believe that the Bible is true. And that means sometimes it's going to be hard to hear. But I hope there is grace for all of us to find. I just want to pray, but what I also want to do today is offer a ministry time, because I feel there's been some big things in there when it comes to adultery, when it comes to divorce, when it even comes to maybe relationship status, where maybe it's really hit home for you and it's hard. If you want prayer today for anything that has come up, I would love to pray for you at the end. Not because I want to know your deepest, darkest secrets, but because I want you to find grace and forgiveness in Jesus Christ, maybe for a cloud you've been living under. I want you to find reconciliation today with whatever the situation might be. So I'm going to pray generally, but if you want something more, after we finish singing some more songs together, I'm going to be down the front and I will pray for whoever might need that today. But let me just pray now. Father, thank you for your word that comes through the Bible. It's not always easy. Sometimes comes across as somber. But Father, you didn't give us this word so that we would just be depressed people. You gave us this word because you said, I have a better way. This is how my followers should live. This is what it should look like. And Father, I pray that this morning's message will be one which has not brought people down, but actually has hopefully made them realize, actually, I can meet Jesus through this. Even through maybe my own struggles in life, my own relationship status, my own past, there is grace from Jesus to meet with me today. Father, I pray that as followers of Jesus, we will be people who connect on a heart level. That we won't put on fronts that say we don't feel pain, we haven't had suffering, we haven't been through things. But actually say, no, I want to get to the heart of this. I want to deal with this. I want to meet you, Jesus, over this. I want my circumstances to change. Father, I pray that out of this whole morning, the message that goes out is that it's one of grace. That you will meet us with grace and mercy. You meet us where we're at. You're ready to pick us up. You're ready to go, yeah, I know that's what you've been through, but let me help. Father, I pray that your gracious and loving arms will meet with us this morning and lift us up where we've maybe been hurt, maybe hurt others. Maybe we've got bitterness in our hearts. I pray that your grace will touch all these areas this morning. Father, don't let anyone leave this place if there is something here where they need your help. Lord, just draw close to us now as we come and sing and worship, because we thank you that you don't just save us and leave us. You save us and want to help us still. So Father, I pray you help us to worship you right now with that in mind. In Jesus' name we pray.